Hi guys, welcome back to another financially fabulous episode. I'm Limor and I'm going to show you how to crush it with your finances. Today I've got a guest with me who I'm super excited that we're going to be chatting about. This is Mitch Parker, who is the founder of North 72. He's a real estate investor. He is a money lover. Can I call you that?
Totally.
Totally a money lover.
Of money, yeah.
And we're going to be chatting, so it's going to be a good time. Stick around. Hey Mitch, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good, I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me, I appreciate
so
it.
So you and I have had a lot of sort of behind the scenes money conversations.
Totally.
Since we've met.
A lot of emails, yes,
and some really interesting, I think, discussions, and it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you here.
Yeah.
So maybe you could just start us off by telling us a little bit about your background. Who is Mitch Parker?
I don't know if we have time to do the who is Mitch Parker.
Okay, just a little bit.
All right. So, well, I went to school for finance.
Okay.
Was never really interested in real estate at that point.
Okay.
Always knew that I wanted to make a lot of money. I never really knew why, but I wanted to make a lot of money.
What age did you sort of figure that you wanted to make a lot of money?
You know, my parents will probably say it's like ever since I could talk and really communicate that they knew that I was into the more expensive things of life.
So was that sort of the reason why you wanted to make money? What is it, to afford stuff, or what was? So
it's funny you ask that. I think now that I've matured more and advanced past like the age of 5 and 7 and all that stuff, it's the freedom that it buys. That's what I like. I like being able to do like what I want, when I want, how I want to do it, and just live on my own terms.
So that's what got you into like a finance?
That's what got me into the finance degree. You know, as I'm sure you teach a lot of your audience, finance is not something that's taught within the school curriculum. And so I just found investments fascinating, how money flowed, all that stuff really interesting.
And did you find that you got a lot of that stuff from business school? Because I'll be honest, I went to business school and I came out on the other end, and I don't know that I was much more financially savvy.
So I think I was really lucky in the fact that I joke with people that I actually grew up in an office. So my dad ran his own business and he was out of the house. And so like from a young age, we were like unpacking and packing boxes and shipping stuff out and coordinating and doing this and that. So through that, I learned a lot. And then my program, because it was a 3-year program, the first year and a half was general business. And then the next year and a half was like finance specialization. In that year and a half, that's where I'd say I learned a lot. So that's where you're starting to calculate like time value of money and compound interest, and you're really getting the lessons that you can use day-to-day life.
So what light bulb went on for you at that point in time?
So I graduated. I was looking for a finance job. While I was doing that, I started working construction renovations. I know, like total left turn. It was the opportunity that was available at the time. And through that, I realized that I was good at it. I started to actually get so busy working for somebody else that I was able to quit working for them, start taking on my own projects. I hired a crew of guys.
So all in the construction world?
All in the construction finance world.
Okay.
And so this was the point where like HGTV and Discovery, they were showing all these crazy real estate shows, right? And to this day, I have this vivid memory, and it's this like crazy woman walking around a house in super high heels, and she's just like barking orders at everybody. You can see she's driving everybody crazy. And I'm watching the show and I'm saying, here I am with a finance background, with a crew of guys. I should be doing stuff like this. And that was
your own TV show, or doing what they're doing?
The real estate. So she was flipping houses. So I was like, I could totally do this. So then I approached my dad actually, and I said, hey, you have a little bit of money and you're able to hold a mortgage. I have a crew of guys and I can find the opportunity. Let's do like a joint venture partnership.
And what did your dad say?
And he was like, yeah, let's go for it.
And did your dad, like, did he charge you interest to borrow the money, or how did you guys structure that?
So we were like a 50-50 partner on the project.
That's so cool.
Exactly. So
let me ask then, you know, if your dad had his own business and you kind of seem to have always had this entrepreneurial venture in mind, were you aspiring to have like a job, or did you always kind of envision yourself as this big money-making entrepreneur?
I always knew I was going to be an entrepreneur.
Did you?
For sure. Yeah. I'm not that good at following other people's orders. I'm usually I'm usually much better at
giving orders?
not just like giving the orders because it sounds like I'm just like
totally
a delegating boss or whatever,
Yeah.
you know, but kind of like I've always had like the vision of what I wanted to build, and I love being able to control the process of that. I don't like when things take too long or when things get too complicated. I think people way overcomplicate things,
Yeah.
including investments, including money. I think there's, you know, you can always break it down to like 3 or 4 main points that will make sure you're on the right track.
Mm-hmm. So that's funny that, I mean, entrepreneurship has been in your blood since the beginning of time. It's actually the exact opposite for me.
Really?
Yeah, so I was born in Israel, and
Right.
My dad had his own construction company.
Oh, cool. I never knew that.
Yeah, he did. But, you know, there were lots of political turmoil that
Sure.
interfered significantly with his business. And so, you know, my parents moved to Canada, and I was almost 8 at the time. But what was instilled in me, probably by accident or more, you know, from watching or observing my parents, was that entrepreneurship was bad. You work so hard, you work around the clock, you know, there's all kinds of ups and downs, and I automatically assumed that entrepreneurship is bad.
Really?
And growing up, like, working for myself was literally never even close to being on the radar.
Now, was it verbally said, like, entrepreneurship is not fun, you should go get a job?
You know, I don't even know.
Yeah.
That's why I say I think it's probably more from observation and osmosis. Like, my parents are never the kind of people to, like, knock stuff, but I
Right.
think that was their experience. And then, I mean, obviously Canada is such a great place to live in.
Totally.
You know, like, both my parents had great jobs, and they still have great jobs.
Yeah.
And were able to make really good money. And so I was like, okay, this is the way to do it, right? And when I went to business school, I loved the idea of, like, oh, I get to be in the corporate world, and never looked anywhere else. So
Right. So it wasn't even a thought until you got sick of the corporate world?
So I love how this is now turned the other way, but
Yeah.
It's funny though, because in hindsight, I was a very typical entrepreneur. And that every role pretty much that I took in the corporate world was a role that didn't exist before. Or its direction was changing so significantly
Right.
that it was as if it didn't exist before. So, like, I launched mobile banking apps the first time they launched in Canada. You know, I did a lot of things that it was kind of the first time around. So even though I was in sort of like the safe haven or box of being an employee,
Like a corporate employee,
I took on a more entrepreneurial
so you were like
role.
building your own path sort of
Yeah.
within a corporation.
Yeah, which is crazy. And I wouldn't have even identified it at the time, but,
Yeah.
you know, and then I started investing in real estate, and then I was like, wait a minute, this is what I've been doing all along, and it kind of felt more natural. But
You know what's funny?
that's
So
how our parents' stigma or experience weighs on us.
yeah, and you know what's funny is like as you were saying that, I was like, what was my last job?
Yeah,
And
I was
so,
going to ask you.
I don't know if this is 100% right. I'm pretty sure it is. I delivered pizzas while I was going to university.
You're so cool. I love it. I love
It was good money.
That's awesome.
It was great money at the
Good
time.
tip money?
Great tip money. It was
That's
like you were in your car listening to jams.
Yeah.
You know, like you just got to deliver pizza. It was,
Okay, so back to you.
Yes, okay.
You're doing your first, is this your first real estate embarkment into investing with your dad when he was your joint venture?
That was my first one, yeah.
Okay, and did that, what happened? Did that spark wanting to do more? Or
Yeah,
how
so-
did that first deal go down? Did
So
you make
like
money?
originally, it's funny because originally we wanted to do a flip.
Yeah.
Right. That was the goal was we were going to find a property that needed some work. We were going to buy it, hire my crew of guys, at which point they would renovate the property, and then we'd resell the property for a profit and kind of move on to the next one.
Perfect plan, right?
Perfect like game plan, which it always
Which
goes
is
to
what
plan,
you see
right?
on those
Yeah.
TV shows,
Exactly.
right? 30-minute fix and flips, and it's all
And
magical.
everything's on budget and everything's yeah, exactly. But what we ended up finding through the research was actually a student rental property that was located near a few universities in Ottawa,
Okay.
and it was rented out to students already. There were already tenants in place, and generated good cash flow every month. And so, you know, the house needed a little bit of work, but we said, you know, in the meantime, it's still generating income, and maybe like between tenants, we'll do some renovations, stuff like that. And so we ended up buying that, and it kind of turned me from wanting to just do sole flips to the kind of buy and hold strategy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's a lot more predictability in the buy and hold strategy.
Do you want to explain buy and hold? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so basically you're buying a property with the intention to rent it out over the long period of time. So when you buy it, there's no plan to sell it, or when your timeline is at least 5 years down the road.
Right. Okay. So originally it was kind of that flip idea, but
Yeah.
it quickly.
It quickly took a turn. I think just
Yeah.
because we came across the right opportunity,
Yeah.
and the numbers looked good, and at that time, like I was 21, you know, and you don't have the most patience at 21, and so you find this opportunity, and you're like, yeah, let's do it, let's buy it.
Yeah.
And so
You're fearless then, huh?
Naive, fearless, yeah.
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both.
I was going to ask, are you still fearless now?
I think I'm more cautious with my choices,
Mm-hmm.
only because I know a lot more than what I did before, and you know where you can take chances and really where you need to pull back and avoid to do your due diligence.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so we ended up buying that property. It worked well. Decided to do it again a few more times over and over again. Built a portfolio. All properties rented to students. So that was kind of like our niche.
And was that all in the same geographic area, or did you diversify a little bit?
So in Ottawa, that's where this was in Ottawa.
Yeah.
And so there's like 2 major universities and a college.
Okay.
And so while they're all pretty close to each other, one of the houses, the first one, was really near Carleton University.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other houses were more focused near Algonquin College, which is
Okay.
like in the west end of the city.
Mm-hmm.
So the diversification was through the different schools,
Right.
but then at the same time, you know, we were looking at things like enrollment numbers and residents that were living on campus versus off campus,
Yeah.
and that number was only trending up. And so we knew that the demand was going to be so stable
Yeah.
for student rental population.
Mm-hmm.
And while you have higher turnover typically, you know, you're always able to get tenants, and if you structure it right, they treat your property well for the most part.
And do you still own those today?
So now I don't, only because I don't have the time to either manage them or manage a manager to do it.
So that's really interesting, because I think that's a piece of the puzzle that sometimes people miss, especially if you're going to be managing property yourself, especially with student rentals. I'm sure there's a lot more turnover and maintenance and stuff.
There is. And you know, when you're evaluating a rental property,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that you have to factor in is, even if you're going to manage it yourself, the numbers should work if it's managed by a company.
I could not agree more, because you know, the whole idea of real estate, at least in my opinion, I'm sure you'll agree, but if not, let me know, is to have that money coming to you as passively as possible.
Exactly.
So that you can have your time back, and you can have money, and you can start to live the life that you really want to live. Now, that being said, I don't think there's ever 100% passive. I mean, you definitely have to at least do the due diligence and the setup up
There's
front.
front end work.
There can be front end work. Yeah,
Sure.
at least a little bit. And you know, every investment
Yeah.
still has things that can go sideways, and so
Of course.
you can't just kind of kick back entirely. You need to sort of manage it even from a distance. So.
And I'm a big fan of you know, finding your niche, and getting really good at it. You know, so if it's buying rental properties, like learn as much as you possibly can about it. Become the expert. Know the areas. Know the pros of it, the cons of it. What happens if this happens? What happens if that happens? Right? And that way, you're not spreading yourself out too thin. And then anything that comes up, you like, the same things happen the same, like, over and over again, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's funny and an interesting, I guess, piece of advice, depending on how narrow you go. So I think my portfolio is a little bit more diversified. I've got some hard money lending, some rent to owns, you know, just a variety of different strategies, some flips and stuff. And what's been interesting is that sometimes I've gone into a project being very confident, like call it 95% confident.
Yeah.
This is what's going to happen. Here's how it's going to work. And then all of a sudden everything changes. So whether it's an adjustment in the market, or it's a tenant buyer who, you know, is partway through a program, then they get divorced, and then we have to do something else with the property, is that I think one of the things that has almost made me a little bit stronger is
I was gonna
doing
say.
different things. I'm not
Okay.
an expert probably in any one in the same way that maybe you are. I have my favorites for sure. But you know, I kind of think of real estate almost as like a Tetris game. It's like as the piece is falling, I'm like, am I gonna do this? Am I gonna do that? Am I gonna rent it
Right.
out, renovate it, sell it, you know?
And I love having those alternative options. But you're, like you said, you're an expert in real estate investing.
It's true. That's why I was saying,
Right.
kind of, is this
That's
sphere
like-
this big or is this
Right,
sphere that
and I
big?
think it's as big as you want it to be,
Mhm.
just as long as you're not talking like, oh, I invest in real estate, but then I'm also like a cryptocurrency expert, and then I'm also like a forex expert, and then like, you know, like I'm a fan of picking the one, and that one can be real estate.
So have you dabbled, and as somebody who loves money, or are some of these other avenues like of serious interest to you as well, or what does that look like for you?
So I know my space, I know what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, and so for me, real estate's always been really good in terms of like creation of wealth.
Yeah.
In terms of both me doing it myself, but then helping others do it as well. So I stick to that. I'm not a believer of the short-term hype stuff. I like what's tried and true and stick to the long-term game.
No, and there's nothing wrong with that. And,
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. So how do you think you got ahead financially in maybe your early 20s, or what did you do either on purpose or by accident,
Yeah.
but let's just call it on purpose, to position yourself to get ahead?
In order to get ahead, I think first and foremost, I was lucky I had access to someone like my dad who was able to facilitate the financing side of my first deal.
Got it.
I realize not everybody has that, and there's ways to work around that to build up your nest egg. I was lucky I got to sort of skip that proponent of it.
Yeah.
I think patience was a massive part of it. Nowadays, there's so many opportunities that are available. Like, you know, you can go online and you can read about 15 different things that suppose they're all going to make you rich and like really fast.
And how many of them actually work?
Exactly, and probably like none of them are what work, right? Like building wealth is a long-term strategy. It's not going to happen for you overnight. Even if you look at people who you think it happened to overnight,
It didn't really happen.
you probably talk to them and they're like, yeah, I've been working at this since I was like 13 or
Yeah.
whatever age they were at, right? And so I think patience is key. I think becoming an expert, again, it ties back to that. So knowing your industry or your craft like in and out is super important. And then also providing value, I think, is a big thing, right? Like people are always concerned with like, well, how much money am I going to make off this? How much money am I going to make off of this? But it's like, how much value can you provide? And then when you provide value over time, that equates to income.
So maybe you have an example, but like let's say you're talking to someone who's 23, you know, they're relatively new out of school, you know, maybe they've got a job, something that they love to do, but they're probably only making, I don't know, $40,000, $50,000, maybe 60, who knows?
Right.
They're kind of in that sphere, and if you're living in the city, I mean, you and I know,
Sure.
the city can be really expensive,
Can be.
everything from, you know, your accommodation to your rent, but then you want to live the city life.
No, you want to have a little bit of fun.
You gotta have fun, right?
You don't have like a nice house and eat macaroni and cheese every night for dinner.
Oh my
That's
gosh.
what I tell people.
Man after my own heart. And so, you know, how would that play out for them? I mean, obviously patience is something that you talked about, but adding value, like what do you think that would look like for someone who's kind of in their early 20s and maybe doesn't have a dad like yours?
Okay, yeah. So I think there's, I'd break it up into two sections. So first, and this is really boring, but you got to know where your money's going. So you have to look at a budget.
Oh, damn. No, I'm just kidding. I
Right.
like budget.
And so I think if you, like everybody spends money in areas where they could save it. It's just a matter of like where. And I'm not saying like don't go buy a latte every day. I'm not, you know, I think like that's fine. It's not going to alter your long-term financial plan if you buy yourself a latte every day.
Yeah.
But knowing where your money is being spent is really the first step. So coming up with that and then figuring out where you can divert that capital to in terms of an investment. And it doesn't have to be big amounts of it.
So you're saying not necessarily spend as much, but take some of that for investing in something else.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, on like a $40,000 or $50,000 income, you're gonna probably want to be pretty conservative with your investments. You know, I know there's a ton of, again, it comes back to like those hype products that are out there. They're not for somebody who doesn't have a substantial nest egg.
Yeah.
Right? And the other side of it, which is way more interesting and way cooler, is to figure out like what you're really good at and try to build like a second or third stream of income based on that. So I know you do a lot of courses, right? And so there's a lot of front end work to do those courses.
Totally.
But once they're up and running, you know, it's more the managing of it than anything else.
Well, and then there's an element of scale, right? When
Exactly.
it comes to stuff like that. No, I love that you're talking about multiple streams of income, and I completely agree that I think when you're starting out, I mean, if you've got your full-time job, there's no reason why you can't still continue to be what I call, like, I guess, trading your time for money. So if you have a dog, like, why don't you walk 2 or 3 dogs and make some money? Or why don't you...
Or, like, dog sit other people's dogs when they're out of town.
I mean, if you love spin class, like, can you be the instructor of the spin class and get paid for it?
I also think providing content is key as well. You have to tell people that you are the expert in X, right? Put it out there. So, like, you know, we were just chatting about this before, but this is 2018. Like, you can get in front of a global audience for free.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you can literally sit there with your smartphone, be like, hey, I'm Mitch Parker, I'm really good at real estate. Take that video, put it on YouTube, put it on Facebook, put it on LinkedIn, and then you have content.
Because we are filming this here in the Financially Fabulous headquarters.
Exactly.
AKA
which is very fabulous, by the way.
My dining room.
Which is very fabulous.
Which is no longer a dining room, but yes. No, but I think that's great. And I mean, you really, and I know you and I have talked about this before, like, it takes work. Like, you have to be able to put in the work.
Yeah. And so I think a good example is, so I used to work with somebody who was talking about, as an entrepreneur, you're typically based on a commission income structure. I am, at least, right? And so you get your income cycle really looks like the ocean with waves. So the ups are where you're making money, and then there are certain days where you don't make any money, and then the next day you make money, and the next day you don't make money. But the key is when you get into the bottom dip of that wave, for it not to be at $0. So for example, if you are selling a course, and you, even if you sell it for like $99, and you can sell one every day, whether you go to work that day or not, you're going to make $100.
Totally.
And so keep adding to that little funnel and bringing that number up, and then eventually, you know, the goal, and it's funny because it's not nearly as high as what a lot of people think, but the goal is like you create enough money passively to cover your expenses.
Which doesn't have to be that high.
No.
I mean, it might be depending on...
It might be, but you can live a very conservative life, and then all of a sudden that's like financial freedom, right? Yeah.
Which is very cool. So getting back to kind of where you were a little bit earlier, did you, I mean, I know the last job that you had was that pizza job, but did you go right into having your crew and doing stuff in real estate, or what were you doing for the next couple of years?
So, you know, when I finished school and I was employed by, I guess that was probably my last job.
Okay.
I was employed by a contractor.
Okay.
And we were doing like residential renovations.
Okay.
And it was through that I got so busy taking on little side gigs. Because in that industry, it's hard to find A, reliable, and B, good workers.
Right.
And so, you know, if you show up on time and sober, you're like ahead of like 80% of the industry. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but
totally fair. You can say whatever you want. Yeah.
I think you're ahead of like 80% of the industry. Right. And so, you know, I started getting calls and messages, and it was just people who are like, hey, I have a bathroom that needs to be done. It's no rush, but like, can you do it over a few weekends, or a kitchen or a basement to be finished?
Yeah.
And then, you know, again, being an entrepreneur, I said I'd rather do my own thing than work for this guy for like $15 an hour or whatever it was at the time.
Okay, so you started doing your own jobs then?
So I started doing my own jobs. I was on my own, like it was just me. And then I ended up linking up with another guy who had some experience. And then I hired like 3 or 4 more guys. And
who were all sober and showed up on time?
They didn't necessarily all show up on time, but they were all sober.
Yeah.
And what I realized doing this, and this will tie back to real estate, I promise. What I realized is, if you're doing the work yourself, You know, like I was like 22, 23 installing a floor for a week. My knees would be sore, my back would be sore. I couldn't even imagine doing it at like 45, 50.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other end is like if you're managing the crews, you're basically a glorified babysitter.
Okay.
And so I said, I don't want to be doing this for the rest of my life. I think I gained some great skill sets out of it. We had already purchased a couple of properties at that point. I said, I'm going to get my real estate license, like my sales license, so that I can access MLS and see the deals myself. And then I can also pay myself when I buy a house, which is nice.
So then were you a full-time realtor, or were you just sort of leveraging elements of the license?
Yeah, I was leveraging elements of license while doing construction. At the same time, you know, when you typically have success, and I'm sure you see this as well, people find a way to appear in your life where they say, hey, can you teach me how you did that? And so I said, yeah, of course. Like, you know, doing it is fun, and teaching it is also super fun for me. I love that part of it. And so we ended up starting to teach people about how to buy your first property, what to look for, what renovations give you the most value that you can do. And through that, then people would say, hey, can we use you to buy a place? And I'd be like, yeah, because I have a real estate license.
Right,
so
you're
yeah.
leveraging that as well.
So then, you know, I ended up transitioning out of the renovation industry, more to the sales industry, you know, from like overalls and a hammer to like a suit and a pen type of thing.
You look great.
Oh, thank you.
Suits you well.
And yeah, from there, it's sort of been a whirlwind of 10 years now. And so, you know, to this day, we've done everything from like, we started with buy and holds. We've done some flips, rent to own deals. I know you're familiar with that. We do a lot of mortgage lending. So we help a lot of clients place mortgage capital into private mortgages. Yeah, really, we've seen like a lot of the industry, and we've now, you know, I got my mortgage license 5-6 years ago now.
And so are you still a realtor?
So I still have a real estate license and a mortgage license.
Okay.
And it's primarily for investing focused.
So you touched on something that I'm actually hoping we talk a little bit about, which is mortgage lending.
Okay.
Amongst all the things that I do in real estate, it's probably one of my favorites. I know that it doesn't, depending on how you structure it, and maybe we can talk about it in a minute.
Yeah.
It's not generating cash flow necessarily always for today if you're doing it like inside your RRSPs.
Right.
But it's I feel like this massive secret that average people, maybe averages.
I don't think average, yeah.
No, but it's something
no,
that's
like
not
the average
conventional.
investor doesn't know exists.
Well, and I think part of that, and I'm going to ask you to explain it. So
yeah.
But I think part of it is that it's not a strategy that's offered in the mainstream big banks, which is I think a big reason why people don't know about it.
I fully agree. I mean, if you look at who's doing the marketing in the investing industry, it's all the big banks.
Big five banks.
That's it, right?
RRSP season, buy your mutual funds.
And what's really funny is if you look at a bank, their most profitable business is the mortgage lending.
It's totally
right. So they take the money as a deposit and they give you like 1% or 0.5% or whatever.
And then
they go and loan out like millions and millions of dollars at a much higher interest rate.
For sure. So maybe can I ask you to explain a little bit about how mortgage lending works?
Sure. So
since you're licensed to do so.
So, you know, the best example is, say you want to buy a house, right? You typically put, if it's an investment property, let's call it, you're putting 20% down. So if you're, the house is $100,000, this is definitely not in Toronto, but the house is...
Yeah, but let's keep the numbers nice
simple.
And easy so I can follow along.
So the house is $100,000, you're typically coming up with $20,000, and the bank is lending you $80,000.
Correct.
So that $80,000 is your mortgage, right? So the bank was the person to give you your mortgage. Now, the peg that the bank wants you to fit into now, if you want to go to them for a mortgage, exactly.
Such a tough one.
It's getting harder and harder, right?
Honestly, especially I would say in the last few months with the mortgage rule changes.
For sure.
Like before, and I think it's a couple of reasons. I mean, the bank is more stringent with their criteria to make sure that you're not in a position where, you know, you're underwater financially speaking. But also coupled with the fact that we're now making money a little bit more differently. So, you know, we're talking about multiple streams of income here. You know, I've seen firsthand a number of people who are making ridiculous money. They've got extra streams of income that don't even count. Like we're talking $50,000, $60,000 of income that they're making that doesn't allow them to count towards their qualification of the mortgage. So it's really tough.
I think that the way that people look at jobs has changed a lot faster than how banks are willing to look at income. And that's only because I think entrepreneurship, and that's really what it comes down to a lot of the time, it's so fluid, right? Like you could decide tomorrow, I'm going to become an entrepreneur, I'm going to start making money.
Yeah.
Whereas like with a bank, because they have so many processes in place, it takes time for them to adapt to everything.
Well, and I also do understand that at the end of the day, they want to make sure that this loan is secure.
Sure.
And when you have an employer, I mean, unless you get fired, you can slack off or do really well, but your income comes the same way. When you're an entrepreneur, it doesn't always happen that way.
Right, and that is becoming, more and more prevalent in the industry, whereas that person who is their ideal client is becoming tighter and tighter. So they really want someone who's been in a job for a long time, who makes very good, stable income, good quality credit, buying in an area, because that matters too, right? Buying in an area that's going to be easy to resell should something go wrong.
But not in an area that's too good, because then the price is too high and the mortgage is too big,
that's
and
right.
Everything stops matching up.
For sure. So the box is getting smaller and smaller,
Yeah.
which is actually great news for anybody who's considering private mortgage lending. And the reason why is because you're getting a better quality client who now does not qualify for the bank, who's looking for this alternative source of money. So, to tie back into what we were talking about before, where instead of the bank giving you that $80,000, you can then go to a private person such as like myself or yourself, because you do this as well.
Bank of Limor.
Bank of Limor, Bank of Mitch, Bank of, John Smith, whatever.
Yeah.
And in turn, they act as the bank and give you the money. And so as an investor, the big advantage is, there's a few, but the big one is like you're registered on title the same way that a bank is. So if that borrower does stop paying the mortgage, you have the right to come in and then sell the property and recoup all your capital back. Another thing is, these mortgage rates are fixed. So which means you get the same amount of payment each month.
Yeah. And often the way, I've seen them, and correct me if I'm wrong or if you've seen these differently, is they can sometimes be interest only.
That's right.
Rather than paying down principal. So even though sometimes the interest rate on these loans can be a little bit higher,
yes,
the monthly payment can sometimes actually even be more manageable because there's no principal reduction as well, right?
Right, exactly. And these are designed, these are designed to be short-term loans. Like, you're not loaning this out to somebody for 10 years.
Right.
This is like, hey, why don't you fit into the bank's peg?
Yeah.
We're going to loan you this money for a year or 2 years maximum.
Yeah.
At which point, we're going to work with you to fix whatever problem that you have. So whether it's a credit issue, whether it's you just haven't been at your job long enough, things like that, till you can show a proper income and then refinance with an A lender.
Yeah. So it's super cool from like a private lender's perspective, because you're making higher interest rates than you would, via mutual funds or anything like that.
That's
but
it.
Also, you're backed by an asset. You're on title on real estate, which is really cool. And I think, part of the way I talk about this a lot is you're not owning the property.
Right.
But you are in fact generating portfolio income, which again, I think is something that people don't talk about or know as much. Everybody knows earned income, time for money. I go to a job.
Sure. Yeah.
I work at the Gap. I work at the pet store.
Did you work at the Gap?
I did.
You did?
Back in the day, yes. I'm very good at folding. But anyways, so when you spend your time, you get a paycheck that's earned income.
Right.
People are familiar with passive income. Everyone sort of knows, oh, if I have a rental property and the tenants pay the rent and you pay off the mortgage and any other costs, any money that's left over, passive income.
Yeah.
But portfolio income, I think, is something people don't know as much about. I just don't think that it's talked about that much. It's like your money making money, which is exactly what lending is.
Exactly. And another part that we should probably mention is this is all RSP, TFSA eligible, cash eligible. RESP, you can do it through a corporation, you can do it individually. So it's like really flexible.
Yeah.
And you can do it in ways like if it's in an RSP, you know, it's all tax free until it's in compounding until you take it out. And in TFSA, it's all tax free.
Yeah,
right?
That's pretty cool. And then you can do this in a way that's, I guess, more fully managed, where your world kind of comes into play. So, I mean, do you charge a management fee, or how does that work?
Yeah, so, you know, typically we work with a lot of investors that are not real estate experts.
Right.
And so as a result, I could show them 5 different mortgage opportunities, and they're not going to know which ones are good and which ones are not. And we don't expect them to.
Yeah.
And so what we're able to do is we're able to say, hey, you know, based on the capital that you can invest, here's where we think your money is going to be best deployed. Here's why it's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And then because we know you're not looking to create an extra job for yourself, worrying about this property, going, collecting the checks, depositing it, anything like that, we fully manage it. So from registration on title all the way to your deposits, to making sure that you get your payments every month, to if there's a late payment, we do the follow-up. We handle all that stuff. The great thing is the investor doesn't get charged for that. So there's no fees. So in our model, returns are, you know, usually in the 10 to 12% range. And that's net. So that's what they're walking away with at the end. Of the day.
No crazy other fees.
No, like, and that's really like a lot of investors that we talk to, they say, well, I made like 7% in my mutual fund last year, but then like the bank took 2.5%, right? And if you track that over a long period of time and compound those fees, you're now talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially.
Well, and not only that, so there's sort of a math example that I do a lot of the time when I work with students, because this is a strategy that I teach and mentor on all the time, so that people, when they come to you, can understand what the 5 deals are and be able to make a good decision for themselves. But, you know, if you are 40 years old, let's say 45, okay? Say I'm 45, you're 45, we're both 45. And
I look good for 45.
You look fantastic for 45, fabulous for 45. Okay, we're 45 years old, which we're not, but we are for the moment. And we're gonna retire from our conventional jobs at 65, because that's what society says we're gonna do. Let's say that at this stage, we both have $100,000 in our retirement savings, or our RSPs. Okay. Now, in this example, neither of us are going to put another cent into our RSPs for this next 20-year duration.
So we're literally going to take like $100,000
for 20 years.
But like it's only a one-time payment of $100,000.
We're not. I mean, in normal society,
no, but this
for this example, you're 45.
I just wanted to be clear.
You got $100,000. You put it in. You don't add another cent for the next 20 years.
Okay.
Set it and forget it. Okay. So in my world, so let's say that I'm using, you know, conventional financial planners. Maybe I'm a little bit nervous. I've got some in GICs. I've got, you know, a mix. The average that, you know, society or financial planners will tell you to hope for is about 5%.
Right.
Okay, standard. So if my $100,000 compounds for 20 years, and I've added nothing more at 5%, I'm going to have $265,000.
You did your math.
I've done the math. I've told these numbers many times over.
Okay.
And so
it's 5%, $100,000 investment over 20 years.
Over 20 years.
You're telling me is now worth $165,000 more.
That's right.
Than it was 20 years before.
Because I'm at 5% compounding.
Okay.
And I'm not adding anything more.
Right.
So this example. Now, let me first just pause here and quickly say that the number that I've heard financial experts saying that the average Canadian needs to retire at 65 is $1.4 million.
And I think that's low, to be honest.
I do think that's low, especially because we're living a long time. But how easy is it to save $1.4 million?
I mean, you can't do it just like...
No. I mean, we can hardly save anything. So anyway, so me, I would be at 5%. Now, savvy Mitch over here is a real estate investor, not generally overall, but you're taking your RSPs and you're going to take that $100,000. Now, the number that I've used is 13% because I also do a lot of not fully managed investments.
Right.
So, you know, if you're in the sphere of 9 to 12, it's very common if you're managing yourself to get, you know, 14, 15.
Right.
So I just use the number of 13 for now. I mean, we can dial that down a little bit. But if you do nothing but get educated on RSP investing, and you take your $100,000, you don't add another cent,
Right.
and you're compounding at 13%, you're at 1.15 million.
It's amazing.
And
so like 265,000
versus 1.1 million.
That's huge.
It's crazy.
And so, you know, just to be clear, the reason why that's happening is because you're making interest on top of interest, right? That's like, I think it's like Albert Einstein talks about like the magic of compound. The eighth wonder of the world is like compound interest. And that's exactly why.
Totally. But it's cool because mortgages is an option to take your money and make it work that much harder for you. And
exactly.
I mean, I'd say for me, when I work on a deal like this as like an end investor, I mean, it's a couple hours at home in my fuzzy slippers. And
I think one really important topic to touch on is, you know, there's all this preconceived notion that like risk is tied to reward, right? And so somebody, like a lot of people that I sit down with say, well, you're going to give me 10%, it's got to be massively risky. And, you know, it's just not. It's a type of investment where risk is not correlated with reward.
So here's actually what's interesting, and you probably use this example when you're talking with clients, is if you look at the lending products that banks give out, you know, credit cards are at 24, 29, 19% interest because there's a lot of risk for the bank. It's totally unsecured.
That's it.
When, I mean, maybe even you get an offer for like, I don't know, 12, but usually unsecured credit is at a higher interest rate.
Yes.
And if we follow that premise, you know, things like a home equity line of credit will usually be closer, call it 5 or 6%,
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, on average. But your mortgage is usually the lowest interest rate of all the products that a bank will offer you.
Right.
So that goes to say that if we're trying to be like the banks, if the banks deem mortgages
the safest investment,
they're willing to give the lowest interest rate.
Yeah.
That should say something to us about, you know, just because it's 10% or 12% or 9 or whatever the interest rate is, doesn't necessarily mean that it's more risky, right?
And I think too, it's important that you know, because people who don't fit into this like bank criteria and who are paying like 10% or you know 12%, they're not necessarily bad borrowers.
No,
right?
not at all.
Like that, it's very important to know that because that's one of the main questions that I get is like, who are we investing in? And they picture this like guy in an alley with like sunglasses on and it's like super shady, right? But like there's a lot of people who are self-employed, who are new immigrants, who need to consolidate debt that they've built up, who have claimed bankruptcy in the past and are just building things up. Like, they're still good people, and there's this really funny trend where people will literally let every other bill go late, but not their mortgage.
Yes. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, it's where your kids live. It's where you live.
No one wants to lose their home, right? Like a credit card, again, like unsecured, a credit card company's going to wait.
Yes.
Your mortgage is going to get paid.
Oh, absolutely. It's the last thing. So actually, to that point, you know, one of the loans that I've done, I'll just kind of give it a high level because I think it, you know, illustrates what you're saying is, it was a family, a young couple in their early 30s. They had their first child. So she was on maternity leave, and a couple months into maternity leave, he lost his job.
Okay.
The husband. And so, you know, she was making a little bit of money while she's on maternity leave, but, you know, not a whole lot.
Right.
And they had a house that they had purchased. They had a ton of equity in their property. So they had bought it a number of years ago. They were paying their mortgage every single month. And because he wasn't working and she was on maternity leave, they couldn't get a home equity line of credit.
Right. They wouldn't qualify through the bank.
Through the bank, exactly, traditional. So at the time that I had got in contact with them, he had just gotten a job, so he had like, you know, his first pay stub that I was able to see. And, you know, when you're actually doing these deals, you get to see like all the people's information.
You do.
Like it's ins and outs. Like these are not sort of uneducated decisions that I'm making. But anyways, point being, so I knew that he started working again. Her maternity leave was over in a couple of months. I knew she was going back to work and her job was secure. And I knew that in a year's time, their mortgage was up for renewal. So, you know, I lent them $50,000 at 15% interest rate. And I know that that seems completely appalling, but they had racked up over $40,000 on credit card debt at more than 25.
I was going to say, yeah, how much are they paying on that?
25. So they were...
And multiple payments, right?
Totally. So they were so grateful
Sure.
for a 1-year window. And in fact, I think, you know, depending on the kind of deals, but sometimes you may even get a payment up front.
Right.
So that the interest may be monthly or it can be all up front. So in this instance, you know, you make the comment about the payments, they were like, okay, we just want to pay you up front and not worry about this for a year. You know, there's a few
So you just took the interest straight off the top?
Straight up off the top.
It's amazing.
And they didn't have to make a payment for a full year, and then they collapsed the mortgage with their first one who was up for renewal. She went back to work, he went back to work, and, you know, everybody's happy.
And so I think really to hammer home the example of how secure this is, you know, we weigh the emphasis much more heavily on the property than the borrower, only because the borrower's situation can change so much faster than the property.
Totally.
So like someone loses their job, that's out of our control, right?
Yeah.
But because we're only investing in 1-year terms, we typically know where the market will be in 1 year. So if we're loaning at like a safe loan to value, we know that it'll probably be worth around that in a year from now.
Totally.
And so to really show the security of this type of investment, after you loan them the money, let's say they stopped paying you.
Yeah.
They didn't have to in that case because they gave you
Yeah.
up front. But let's say they were doing it monthly
Stop paying, yeah.
and they stopped paying you. Then like what would you do? What would be the process? You would take the property back?
Yeah, so I mean, it depends if you're first mortgage or second
Right.
mortgage, which is also a differentiation here.
So for ease of example, let's just
Let's call
assume
it first
call your first mortgage.
First mortgage, you would step in and foreclose on it the same way that a bank does.
Right, and then you would then sell that property.
Well, so that's kind of where I get back. Okay, so in a straightforward scenario,
Right.
you would sell that property, you would recoup your initial investment, and you'd probably even get a little bit more.
And any difference would go back to the homeowners for power of sale process, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, there's legal fees and a bunch
Sure,
of other
all
things that
that.
come into
Yeah,
play,
exactly.
but yes.
But you would be able to recoup your whole investment plus all the fees that it cost you to go through that process, right? And so that's like the worst case scenario.
Yes.
And
Well, and then even that's part of why if you're strategic about the loan to value,
which you have to be.
which yes, you have to be, but I've seen some investors not be as strategic. But the point is,
Yes.
if
You're all very smart
Very
viewers,
smart.
so we know you're going to pay attention
very
to the loan
savvy.
to value.
So when you know that there's already, you know, in Mitch's example, if the $100,000 was the cost of the property, there's $20,000 that's down.
That's right.
And so, you know, if you have lent $80,000 in that scenario, even if the market drops from 100,000 to 90,000, that's a 10%, you know, market drop.
Yep.
There's still more than enough money there for you to get your initial money back.
Exactly.
So it's
Exactly.
the same thing. I mean, you're going to be just as smart and strategic as the banks are. You're just going to not necessarily look for the same peg or criteria.
Exactly. Yeah, you're going to be a little more broad with who you'll accept.
Yeah. Totally.
And I think that that's why risk is not tied to reward in this case.
Totally.
You get like low risk and a high reward. It kind of like flips the model on its head.
Well, and that doesn't happen very often. But what I will say is that you need to be educated. You know, this is not
100%.
one of those things where you just walk into a broker who does this and
Yes.
you just say, oh, here's my money, because at the end of the day, even if it's fully managed, like, you could still end up in a sideways situation.
Totally.
And you need to be able to say, and so this is kind of where I go back to my little like Tetris game,
Yeah.
is that, one of the things that I really think about when I'm going to do one of these is, in the worst case scenario, if I acquire the property and the value has dropped significantly, what else can I do? Can I renovate it? Can I flip it? Can I rent it out? Can I turn it into a rent-own? Can I wholesale it to somebody else? Like, you have to, I think Stephen Covey's, one of his habits for highly effective people is begin with the end in mind. So, even though majority of these go totally fine, and I'm sure you've got an incredible track record with these. And
what's amazing is, like, to this day, we've never lost an investor dollar.
it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome. And that's typically in the range. I mean, anybody could lose money.
Sure.
And I think it's also a little bit different if, like, you're going to do it on your own, because if you are going to do it on your own, even all the more reason to be properly educated to know what it is that you're looking for.
Oh, and that's a big reason why I think, you know, we've been successful to this point,
Yeah.
is because we do know the space and we know where we can loan and where to avoid.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, and we're avoiding, like I would say in the private lending world, we're on the most like conservative side of it.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, the defaults are virtually non-existent.
Yeah.
There's always, and like, you know, we said before, take over the house and sell it, but like there's a lot of steps between
It's
a
not-
mispayment and the sale
Totally.
that they can catch up on. Like there's a
Totally.
human element to this as well, right?
Well, and that's one of the things that I particularly also love about it. I mean, it's great to make money. I know you like to make money.
I do.
But, like, it's great when you can help somebody. Like, that family who was in a tough situation when he lost his job, I mean, like, that's tough. And you've got a new
Yeah.
baby and you're trying to, like, put things together. You know,
Mhm.
you have to really consider that, like, stepping in there, I felt great because even though I was making a lot of money, I was really helping a family who was in a
Well, it's a
tough
win-win for
situation.
everybody.
Totally.
That's it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. So what are some of the other things that you are working on or doing these days?
Okay, good timing for this question, actually.
Yeah.
So number one is obviously what we chatted about, you know, putting a lot of client capital into the private mortgage world.
Correct.
So that keeps us pretty busy, but, you know, because I'm always looking for the next experience, we are actually launching a 200 unit development project. This is in Ottawa.
Cool.
And this is an investor-focused platform.
Okay.
It's actually a seniors residence.
Okay.
And it's going to be a guaranteed lease back by the developer. And so you buy the condo, you hold it for 5 years. There's a guaranteed lease that's going to come in over those 5 years. And then after 5 years, what's going to happen is the developer is going to buy back all the units from investors using market range.
Okay.
And then the investor themselves, they make their money from 3 different areas. So the cash flow each month,
Mm-hmm.
the mortgage pay down,
Mm-hmm.
and then the appreciation.
Mm-hmm. So let me just kind of play this back just to make sure that I've got it. So you're building this massive seniors unit.
Yep,
Seniors, and there's going to be 200 units in it.
that's right.
So I, as an investor, could purchase one of them.
A condo.
A condo.
So there's 200 condos.
200 condos. So I purchase a condo, and
Yep.
you're going to guarantee and manage the lease for 5 years?
That's right. Exactly.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. And so the thing is, and after 5 years, we're going to buy that unit back from you
Okay.
at fair market value.
So if it goes up or if it goes down?
So, and the best part is, if it goes down,
Yeah,
we'll never give you less than what you paid for it.
that's cool. So why would you buy it back?
Because it's going to be eventually a cash flow play for the developer. So he
Got it.
wants to develop multiple buildings like this.
Okay.
And so what's going to happen is we're going to sell the units.
Mhm.
The investor is able to make themselves a great return,
Mhm.
own the asset.
Mhm.
And then after 5 years, once the developer purchases it back, we're going to have other units for them to buy
Yeah.
as well. And then he gets to take this and use it as a cash flowing model for himself.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And what's kind of the price range of the individual units?
Start at 289.
Okay.
So it's like very affordable, especially
Yeah.
if you know Toronto prices.
Oh,
Uh,
for sure.
So 289, and I think the most expensive unit's going to top out at like 499.
Okay.
so
And
that-
what kind of cash flow do you think is going to be on these?
So when I'm breaking down an investment,
Yeah.
you know, mortgage pay down and monthly cash flow are numbers that you can actually control,
Oh, for
right?
sure.
Market appreciation is nothing more than a speculation because no one knows what's going to happen.
I don't have a crystal ball.
Exactly.
I
Nobody
wish
does.
I did,
And if
yeah.
you have a crystal ball, I would like to meet you.
For sure.
So based on that, cash flow and mortgage pay down, the returns are like 12.3% is what they start at per year.
12.3. Okay.
And then factoring in a super low appreciation rate, so we're using like 3%. Ottawa historically has actually done over 5 a year.
Okay.
So we're using 3%, and we're expecting it to actually be better because Ottawa is really poised for some serious growth the next 5 years.
But we don't know for sure.
We don't know for sure, right? So we're going to use 3,
Yeah.
and if you get 3, including the mortgage pay down, including the cash flow, including the appreciation, you're looking at like 25% a year.
Okay. So some of that is speculative and part of it is not.
Yeah, 12% is like what you're going to make if the market sits flat for 5 years.
And so that would be would you get the payments on a monthly basis because it's the cash flow, and then the rest you realize when you sell because the mortgage has gone down?
Exactly. Exactly. So, and because all the units vary a little bit, it's going to change from unit to unit how much that cash flow component is, how much the mortgage pay down is, all that stuff.
Now, what about, I hope you don't mind the questions on this particular
This
topic.
is great.
From a contingency standpoint, like if you're buying and holding in the way that we talked about previously,
Yeah.
Obviously you've got to have like a slush fund in case, I don't know, something happens, right? In one of the units, or there's an issue with the roof or the furnace or whatever the case may be when you're the owner.
Right.
Is there additional slush fund that's required, or is that sort of baked into?
No, and the best part is that like the way that these contracts are going to be written, the developer is responsible for all that stuff.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So it's like a truly.
I like it.
So the thing that I love about this is seniors, residences, and housing. There's going to be a massive demand for it in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah. Probably a little bit closer to 10 from stuff that I'm reading, but anyways.
Right, it's on the upper trend.
It's happening. Everyone's getting old.
Everyone's getting old. There's more. I think I saw a stat where there's like more older people than younger people right now, which is really interesting. And so, this is a purely passive investment that normally, if you wanted to get into seniors housing, you would either have to buy like a Chartwell REIT, so like some shares or something, or like a whole facility. Right. And then have it managed and all that stuff. So this is allowing investors that like entry point to take advantage of that niche in seniors housing. And then, we compared very closely to student housing because there's a lot of projects out there that you can like buy a condo, it's rented to students. And if you look at like, who would you rather have as a tenant? Like a university student?
I don't have an old cat lady.
You would rather have an old cat lady.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. And like, these are people who are usually financially well off. These are people who are not hard on the units.
Well, no, because I mean they're renting, and it's part of a broader facility, correct?
Exactly.
So
and they get all the care in this specific project. They're able to pick like a la carte services. So if they need certain things, they can just one-off check a box, and then they'll have that provided to them. So and there's some cool technology. It's a really exciting project.
Yeah. Can I ask a couple more questions about it?
Go ahead.
So if there's a unit, I know you said 289, so if the unit's 289, would I need the full 289, or would I just need 20% down?
20% down.
Okay.
And then we're working with specific lenders to get financing for all the buyers.
So I don't have to qualify for a mortgage on my own with my own broker?
So you can, and that's an option. If you want to use your own broker for that other 80%, that's fine. But we are working on special rates and such.
And are you doing any mix or combination? And by that I mean, like, what if I gave you 20% down but I can't qualify for the mortgage? Or what if there was someone who qualified for mortgage but didn't want to put their 20% down? They'd obviously need the money to be able to qualify.
Right. So, that's a good question, and I don't have an answer for you at this point on it. But what we would probably try to do is if we had a number of those people, we could easily put people together where they could do a joint venture, similar to like the first deal that I did, right?
Nice.
It'd be me and my dad all over again.
Yeah.
And it would just be, hey, I have the money, and hey, I have the opportunity to qualify for the mortgage.
Yeah.
Let's get together and split the difference.
Totally.
Right? So I think it would definitely something that we can.
Well, I only ask because that's a little bit of what my world looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely there's instances where I've worked with millennials who are in the downtown of the city. They have good jobs, but they're not going to buy in the city anytime soon. And so, they're helping qualifying for mortgage, and I'm sort of being able to pay them flat out for qualifying for the mortgages as smaller properties on the outskirts or somewhere near like Ottawa.
Yeah.
And then the inverse, it's, there's definitely lots of money lying around.
That's it, exactly.
So I'm glad you're open to the different. So, I mean, for somebody who really loves money, it looks like you've done some really cool things in real estate. You're creating some really awesome things, which is exciting, especially new to the marketplace. Yeah. Can I ask you what maybe some of your goals are, some of the things that you're working on?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. First and foremost, and this sounds super basic, I want to be happy, right?
I actually think that that's something a lot of people overlook.
I fully agree with that. You know, a lot of people, and I was just thinking about this as I was driving over here today, because there was someone on the radio and they were talking about, they said like the weekend zone was here.
Fast forward 5 days of your life to get to the weekend.
And I was thinking like, I would hate to live my life looking forward to these like 2 magical days where I didn't have to do what I did the other 5. And so being happy is really the core of everything, right? And part of being happy for me is like the next step is like, okay, well, what's going to make you happy? Right? And doing what you love, I think, is very important. I'm very lucky I get to do what I love now. You know, it's one of those things like if you could say, what would you do if you were given any option? Like real estate would be probably like on my top 3. For sure. Like I'd probably be a race car driver, realistically. You know, I really love that. But, you know, when reality sets in.
Well, and then there's the way sort of Steve Jobs talked about it, and I'm probably going to butcher this stuff, but if you knew you had 6 months left to live, you know, wouldn't you be doing what you're doing now? Yeah, and I can confidently say yes, right? Which is really interesting. And I don't think a lot of people can.
I agree with that. You know.
I would be doing this for sure.
Yeah, oh for sure. Well, your life is so fun.
Ups and downs and like normal like the rest of us, but you know, it's cool to be able to do this. I mean, worked in the corporate world for all that time, and while there was a lot of that time that I really enjoyed what I was doing, kind of when I got closer to the end of my time in the corporate world, I was like, you know, do I just want to make more money for a bank, you know? And I was kind of been running informal workshops about money for anybody who would listen to me, and it kind of really got me thinking like, this is what I'd love to be able to do. So. And
when you love what you do, when you do hit those like hard times, it's so much easier to power through them, right?
It is. It is.
Yeah, it's still a challenge. Like,
it's
don't
still
get me
a
wrong.
challenge.
It's still a challenge.
And I love how like, you know, more money makes bigger problems or different problems.
I don't agree with that. I don't think it makes bigger problems. I think there's different problems.
Yeah, there's different things.
But I think that again, it becomes, you almost like, you don't look forward to the problems, but you like, you welcome them and you tackle them and you say like,
and you're like, I can persevere.
That's it, exactly. Yeah. Because you have like this like bigger vision ahead.
For sure. All right, so your first goal is
So my first goal is to be happy. I mean, if you want to break it down like numbers wise, so personal net worth of $100 million.
Okay.
That's my number goal.
And did you come up with that number when you were 5 as well?
I don't know if I knew numbers got that big at 5. No, I think that's been like a later in life thing, and people say like why 100 million?
Yeah, why?
You know, and that's just for me a special number to hit.
Okay.
It allows me again, and one of my goals in order to be happy is freedom.
Okay.
Right, and so that I know a lot less allows me freedom.
Yeah, you'll probably get freedom long before you get there.
For sure, but I always want to stay motivated. I always want to stay hungry. I think that, you know, when you hit a certain number, whether it's, you know, 1 million or 10 million or 25 million, it's not like I'm going to hit that number and then like check out of everything.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, I feel like I've read a study that more money makes you happier until you hit whatever called $75,000.
Right.
And then there's
I heard 60,000, but probably in Toronto it's like a
in
little
and
higher.
around that.
Yeah.
You know, having that more money gives you, you know, you can buy better groceries, and then once you hit 75,000, like if you make another extra few thousand, it doesn't really augment
like
your
the margin. It's only marginal happiness.
Yeah, and I feel like there's something that happens around 150, but then it kind of peters off. I don't even know what study that was, and so please don't quote me on that one, but you know, I've heard that at that point.
And this really comes down to knowing what you want from life.
Yeah.
Right? I think 75,000 is great for certain people. For myself, I know that it could never work. I know like 150 could never work for me, like long term, right? And so I think individually knowing yourself is very important. My number is 100, and you know what? I'm always open to change. And if 5 years, if 200, a billion, so like if 5 years from now that number is different, then that number is different. But like right now, what I'm operating on is like a set of fundamentals and principles and work ethic that will get me to that 100.
So how do you think about that? I mean, is that it? I want to be 50, I want to be 65, I want to be 105, I want to be 45. Do you like reverse engineer and say that's how much I need to save towards my net worth, or is it just kind of more that's the North Star and I'm going to march in that direction?
I think part of it's that's the North Star,
Okay.
but you're not blindly marching, right?
Okay.
When you want to come up with a number that's big like that,
Yeah.
you're not going to do it just by taking aside a set portion of your income and putting it into like a GIC or something, right? Like
You're well beyond GICs at this point.
right? Like there's going to be major steps in there that are more like investment and development and focus like that, where you can like really maximize your growth.
Yeah, for sure.
And again, that's a plan that it's fluid. Like you can only control really what happens today.
Totally.
Tomorrow, you never know what could happen. The market could be down a massive amount. It could slide into a recession for the next 5 years. It's all stuff that you can't control.
Mm-hmm.
So what I know now is like, here's where I want to be.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm doing today that's getting me closer to that goal.
Yeah.
You know what? I think it's there's a book called The One Thing, and like the main premise is like, what's the one thing that you can be doing right now to get you closer to where you want to be tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that quote, because it really enables you to like sit down and you're like, if you're working on a task, you can say, is this the most important task right now? And if it's not, then why are you doing it?
For sure.
Right? Do something else.
So do you do monthly or quarterly or annual checkups or check-ins on that one thing or getting towards that goal? Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I'm like a to-do list guy.
Okay.
And a prioritized to-do list guy. I think like,
color coding and highlighters or.
So this morning's list is actually like full-blown highlighted.
Okay.
You know?
I didn't expect that from you, but I love it.
Only because today ends up being a crazy day.
Okay.
A lot of times what it is like, it's the top 3 things that I have to do in the day. Anything that I do below that top 3 is like a bonus.
And are you a big fan of Eat Your Frog for Breakfast?
I don't know what that is.
That's fine. It's a book where it's about you're supposed to eat your frogs for breakfast, like the ugliest, worst thing that you don't want to do.
Oh.
You're supposed to do first thing in the day.
No, not at all. I don't want to do that. That's not fun.
Okay.
I actually try to delegate the things that I really don't like to do more than anything.
Good answer. Good answer.
So like, that being said, like I do have a team of guys that work in amongst my companies that they handle a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But like again, I love what I do. So even like the ugly stuff and like the conversations that you don't want to be having, they're not so bad.
Yeah.
They're really not.
That's awesome.
I think I also have the personality type where you kind of just like attack it and don't think of it.
Make it happen.
Make it happen.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I think if I were to prioritize the top 3, it's not necessarily like the baddest or the ugliest.
Okay.
It's like
it's what's gonna move the needle.
It's what's gonna move the needle, right? And what's really funny is I haven't done this for like a long time, but like a few years ago I wasn't doing this, and I think the biggest difference that you notice now is like how much stuff there is in your day that if you don't get done, it doesn't matter.
Give me some examples.
So like something's on your to-do list.
Yeah.
I'm sure okay, this is a good example. You have a to-do list, right?
For sure.
And you transfer it from like Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday to Thursday to Friday. And like there's certain items that like for some reason just don't get crossed off. They just make it to the next day. And then like 3 weeks later you're like, why is this thing still on my to-do list? Right? And like you haven't done it. And like the world is not any worse off because you haven't done this.
Unless it's your taxes.
Well, sure, unless it's your taxes.
I'm just kidding, but yes.
But, and so something like that, like, if you didn't do it for a couple days in a row, either you just don't care to do it, like you don't deem it important enough to do, or it's just not that important and you probably don't have to do it in the first place. And so don't get caught up in all of those little details, because like being busy and being productive are 2 like totally separate things.
Oh, for sure.
And so I think like keeping your eye on the prize and saying like I need to be productive is way more important.
Absolutely.
And then also, I mean, having money is great. Money essentially fixes a lot of life's problems, but not all of life's problems. And so there's still a big element to like, I love animals. and I love rescuing dogs. And so I want to be able to rescue like a ton of animals, and I want to be able to help young entrepreneurs, and I want to be able to be a mentor to people. And so, you know, money buys your time back, and then it's what you spend your time doing that.
And I know this also because we know we've talked offline and before many a time, that, you know, a big part of your wanting to achieve that number so that you can do more of those things.
Exactly.
Which is pretty cool.
And it comes down to like the freedom of choice. You know, do I want to fly to South Korea and rescue 25 dogs today? You know, yeah, let's go do it, because you know that you're in a financially comfortable situation where you don't need to go to work like that week, right? Or you have a team in place that's going to handle it.
It's going to make things a little bit easier.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing some of those goals. It's
no
awesome.
worries.
And
Yeah.
I think, you know, how we get there is by having goals. So it's
That's
cool
it.
to know what your sights set on.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, Mitch, I want to thank you so
No,
much
thank you
for
so much. This is so
joining
fun.
and divulging and sharing. and honestly, I want to acknowledge all the work that you've put in and all the self-learning and development and sort of foresight, because, you know, there's not a lot of folks out there who are really so opportunistic in seeing what's possible, especially when it comes to money. And, you know, it sounds like you've always been an entrepreneur, and I look forward to seeing all the great things.
I thank my dad.
Yeah, which is awesome. So if folks are interested in getting in touch with you, or they would like to ask you some more questions, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yeah, so my website, mitchparkergroup.com.
Which will be linked down below.
Awesome. You can also find me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the way. Do people still use Twitter? I'm not sure.
Use Twitter,
okay.
yeah, for sure.
I'm mainly like an Instagram, Facebook guy.
It's all good.
Okay, at Mitch Parker RE, so like for real estate.
Perfect.
Right, RE. Yeah, and I'm always happy to answer questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you guys have any questions, you can always link them up below, any comments. And, you know, we talked a lot about some pretty advanced strategies here that, you know, both Mitch and I are involved with. So if we can support you in any way, definitely let us know. You can always reach out to us in the comments below. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And if you guys are looking for more tips and tricks and inspiration, come on over to limor.money. And thank you so much. Have a financially fabulous day.
Bye.
Bye.